morning.
Prof, I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm doing well, Mr. Fema.
First, let's start with, and it's the question that I am asking. This 8-point agenda, is there anything that you think should be on that agenda that is not there?
All right. So, thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to take clearing that the 8-point agenda or the strategy that the Mahama'S administration is putting in place is highly important. But as to whether the implementation will yield the necessary result or no is another question. One critical thing I thought could have been included is the physical discipline measures that need to be put in place. Even though if you look at the first point, which is talking about completing the IMF program with discipline, it is important to note that this physical discipline needs to have political will. And if there's no political will to restrain the politicians from spending beyond the expected or their target set, these 8 pillar strategies will not yield the necessary result. Please, I don't know. I'm getting the feedback, so maybe.
Oh, sorry.
I'm
not sure it's coming from my end because I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Yes. But you are saying that discipline is key. Is a watchword for you.
Exactly.
So to you, without discipline, everything else on this agenda may come to naught.
Exactly. You see, we know how politicians behave. So if there's no discipline, moral discipline, this 8-point agenda will not yield the necessary result. And basically, there should be strategies or maybe some strict measures put in place to discipline those who may flout the expenditure, especially most of the ministries and agencies sometimes overrun their budget expenditure. And at the end of the day, when they do that, it comes back to affect us as a country.
So, exactly, because you're talking about political will, exactly what are you expecting from the government? Because I recall there was this, there was this law that was passed that was supposed to restrain the government from spending beyond a certain limit. That was suspended in the wake of COVID, and it's never really been enforced since then. Exactly what do you anticipate from government to assure you that they intend to stick to that discipline?
So basically, that is why I'm saying the political discipline. Most of the times, these laws that are passed, the politicians flout these laws. But be as it may, with the current situation and looking at the government, especially being led by John Mahama, I have realized that there is some kind of political will to make sure that his ministers, the various CEOs of, government state-owned institutions, stay within their budget. And if he's able to maintain that going forward, there's the likelihood that government will be able to do what? To complete the IMF program with physical discipline, such that it can achieve the necessary results or targets. As we are aware, the current situation where we are having appreciation of the cedi basically has helped in reducing our debt, as being said by the governor of Bank of Ghana, that our debt has been reduced from 61.9% to 51% of the GDP. So it is critical to note that there is some kind of political will, and the fact that the appreciation of the cedi is tasting or is happening currently, it is important to note that this brings down the amount of money we need to service or the amount of dollar we need to buy to be able to service our debt. And that is critical. Now, if you look at the second point, which is reopening domestic and international capital markets, the question is, how do you reopen domestic and international markets? Now, if it happens that government is able to go to the Eurobond to borrow again, what rate are we going to borrow from? If the rate is so high, it is going to increase our debt stock because we have to get enough dollars to be able to do what? To pay the debt in future. So it is important for us to get the international bond market to have confidence in the economy. And if we have confidence, they have confidence in the economy, it means that we'll have reduced rates of borrowing from the international market. And currently, look at the rate at which the domestic market interest rate in terms of not even interest rate, treasury bills.
Yeah, the treasury bill rates, yes,
is high. So if government is borrowing at this rate, 15%, 19%, at the end of the day, what investment can you do to recoup the return so that at the end of the day you should be able to pay back your loan? So it is important for us to note that government needs to work more on bringing down inflation. And if inflation comes down and the monetary policy also comes down, it will trickle down to the treasury bill rate, which will come down so that government can borrow from the local market. But there's also another issue we need to deal with. If government is borrowing from the local market, is government crowding or maybe reducing amount of money available for private sectors or private sector to borrow from the local market? And if it happens that way, the private investment is going to be affected. So it is important for us to know that government needs to work hard to be able to have the interest down, or maybe to reduce the inflation. And when the inflation comes down, the interest rate on borrowing, the interest rate on treasury bills will also come down. Now, let's also come to the point, about strengthening sovereign funds and then local government financing. Most of the time, most of the organizations, especially, let's say, our oil money and other things, these funds need to be, kept in sinking funds or sinking and stabilization funds, so that at the end of the day, when we are distressed or we are in a situation where our economy is in distress, we can go to the sinking fund to withdraw some of these funds to support the economy. But what do we see? Most of the social policies like free SHS, for instance, government is drawing money from these sinking funds or stabilization funds to fund the free SHS policy. And when it happens that way, the amount of money in the sinking fund or stabilization fund is reduced. And this affects future development, especially when we have crisis. So these are some of the things government needs to put in place to make sure that most of our organizations or institutions that are able to generate enough funds, like the Grow Board, for instance, some amount of the returns from the Grow Board to be able, government to be able to what? To put it in the sinking fund.
Okay.
Secondly, government should be able to make sure that some of the royalties from our gold exports, some of the royalties from our oil exports should be put in the sinking fund. So these are some of the things that government should be able to do to make sure that at the end of the day, when there is a crisis, we can have enough funds to be able to do what? To support our economy.
So you want government to
the IMF to have a lot of restrictions that we don't like.
So you want government to look at the funding sources of sinking fund. You want a lot more funds from diversified areas into the fund. So more.
Exactly. So we need to have more diversified areas where we can get more funding to put in the sinking fund. And when we're able to do that, and we saw the amount of money we have in the sinking fund, it will help when there's future crisis.
One other thing that government would eventually have to do, and is dealing with the matter of infrastructure. Of course, the state of infrastructure is in a state of disrepair. Our roads, there are many schools to work on. There are many of the schools that they started when they were in government back in 2016 that were left unattended to, and clearly those schools are needed. So clearly they need to spend on infrastructure. The move is to go through big push. In some cases, also use, municipal bonds, among others. Are those good moves? Those good ways of avoiding getting into the debt trap that we've seen over the past few years?
Please, can you come again? I didn't get it clear.
Yeah, so I was asking whether the government's move, one, to use the avenue of the big push, and two, to also use municipal bonds, support the municipalities to float bonds for infrastructure projects. Are those ways that will help government avoid the debt trap, that kind of debt trap we've seen with the Akufo-Addo government?
It is interesting. If you are talking about the municipal bonds, it is important to note that such bonds must be able to finance themselves. So if you are able to take, government is able to support the municipalities to be able to take some bonds from the international market or even the local market to support the infrastructure, such as maybe the building of roads, the building of schools, the provision of water systems. The question is, are those infrastructure able to generate enough funds to repay the loan? If yes, then I will go for it. But basically, most of our infrastructure are such that they are not able to generate enough funding or enough returns to be able to pay back the loan. But if you look at some of the areas like Greater Accra, Greater Kumasi, Takoradi, Sekendi, those areas, these are urban areas. And I believe if government is able to support them to get bonds or maybe take loans to build some road infrastructure, we can put, toll booths so that people pay tolls to be able to repay the loan. There are a lot of infrastructure gap in terms of schools. The question is, our school infrastructure is usually social service. And it is important to note that we cannot run away from social service. So government needs to find a very strategic way of funding the road infrastructure. For water systems, if we are able to bring in private sector I'm sure we can support the municipality to be able to have water system that can generate enough funds to repay back the loan. So some of the infrastructure that we can use PPP or build, operate, and transfer system. And when we're able to do that, the pressure on government will be reduced.
I see. Let me conclude on two notes. One, the first one is what you think the relevance is the relevance of agric, because in his agenda, when talking about export, he's talking about the agriculture for economic agenda and also using this to maybe grow our food production capacity. The rest through exports using the Exim Bank. How big would that be to the need to move away from where we are, recover and also grow?
In fact, the agri sector is one of the areas that can transform the economy of Ghana. And over the years, most governments have played lip service to the agricultural sector. If you look at our agricultural transformation agenda, for instance, the current system where we have the modernizing agriculture, which is Mabe, has been transformed into planting for food and jobs. In fact, we can only modernize agriculture if we move away from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation agriculture. And I have personally conducted research in the area of rice. And we've realized that domestic rice production under irrigation can be done twice a year. And the yield is as much as high as 6 metric tons per hectare. But those that are being produced under rain-fed is around 2 metric tons per hectare. So for government to be able to reap the benefits from the agriculture sector, I think that the Exim Bank should strategize and make sure that we invest in irrigation agriculture. If we are able to invest more in the irrigation agriculture, we should be able to produce enough, and when the productivity increases, we'll have more to process, and we can feed the industry, especially the agro-processing industry, and we can export to our neighboring countries as well as even outside Africa. So it is important for government to work hard to make sure that at the end of the day, we are able to get enough funding support for the agriculture sector. And I like the recent policy that government has put in place, especially Feed Ghana program or Feed Ghana policy that has been launched recently. In the policy, we've realized that government is trying to support farmers, but the question is, the irrigation aspect of it is not so much. So it is important for government to invest more in irrigation so that we move away from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation agriculture.
And like I said, I'll conclude with this, and this has to do with the payment of the arrears. Government says they've been doing some verification. They'll be done by the end of May, and then they'll start paying. Good move.
Yeah. Come again?
I was asking whether that's a good move.
Yes, it's a good move. The arrears, a lot of people have they have contracts with government. But the question is, are those contracts legitimate? Some of the requests they are asking government to pay in terms of the debt owed by government, are they legitimate? If government is able to audit all those arrears or audit all those debts and realize that they are legitimate, and government is able to pay, in fact, that will be a good move. It will reduce our debt stock, and at the end of the day, government will have the physical space to invest more in the economy. So it is a good move. But the only thing is that I will urge government to make sure that there should be a comprehensive audit, forensic audit, to make sure that those arrears are legitimate and people have the right to claim them. Some might not be legitimate, especially coming from the fact that the Akufo-Addo government, there are a lot of issues in terms of the award of contracts. There are a lot of issues in terms of political apparatus getting questionable contracts. It is important for government to audit all these areas, and then if they are legitimate, government need to pay. And if we are able to pay our arrears, I mean, to give the government the space to be able to award more contracts. That is, I mean, a good point.
Well, Prof, we have to leave it here. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
All right.
Yeah, that's Professor Franklin Mabe. He's an agric-economist, actually, University of Development Studies, joining us on the line. Albert is still in studio with us. And Albert, and I think one of the key things